On Saturday, the 23rd of November 1963, television viewers in Britain settled down to watch a new programme the BBC hoped would successfully bridge the tea time gap between grandstand and jukebox jury with something all the family could enjoy. The programme was dreamed up by Canadian television executive Sydney Newman, lured to Britain to beef up the BBC's drama department. Doctor Who was meant to be educational in the Rethian tradition, using time travel to explore famous moments in science and history. Its makers would probably have been astonished to know that 43 years later, an updated Doctor Who would win a BAFTA award as Best Overall Drama Series. Britain has a rich tradition of Gothic-shaped fantasy, reaching from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Bram Stoker's Dracula through to H.G. Wells and George Orwell. But Doctor Who's fantasy world was different. The Doctor himself was only a little bit frightening, and the scary bits were more likely to be filmed in the slag heaps of South Wales than outer space.
Doctor? What Doctor? Doctor Who?
The basic character of the Doctor is that he's a hero. He's an old-fashioned, honourable hero.
Writer Terry Dix and Dr. Mark VI Colin Baker.
It's the classic Lone Ranger, Sir Lancelot. It's the man who rides into your village, rights all the wrongs, and you don't know a huge amount more about him afterwards, but you know he's a thoroughly decent chap and he's on your side.
Official Soviet films of recent space tests involving...
In 1963, Doctor Who arrived in a world full of insecurities, with East and West eyeing each other with suspicion.
5, 4...
The race for space inspired a whole industry of American sci-fi films.
Fire.
Blast off from Earth with courageous astronauts, travel thousands of miles through space to the unknown.
A young former production assistant with experience of American television, Verity Lambert, was given the responsibility of developing the new BBC series.
Although there was a format, within that format you could do almost anything you wanted. So any sort of imaginative idea that came in from a writer which appealed to David Whittaker, who was my story editor, and me, we would just commission.
Her BBC boss, Sydney Newman, was taking a risk, but he was confident in her talent.
I dreamed up Doctor Who and looked over the whole staff. I had about 175 people at the Beeb. I didn't feel any one of them would have the sense of irreverence and yet the basic sincerity that I really wanted in Doctor Who.
The launch of Doctor Who was planned for the 23rd of November 1963. But on the 22nd of November came a momentous moment of real-time history. Across the Atlantic, in Boston Symphony Hall, the conductor Erich Leinsdorf stopped the lunchtime concert broadcast on station WGBH to make this announcement.
Ladies and gentlemen, that the President of the United States has been the victim of an assassination. We will play the funeral march from Beethoven's Third Symphony.
Despite the shock of the Kennedy assassination and frantic rescheduling of programmes on BBC One, the debut transmission of Doctor Who the next day went ahead. The first task was to try to explain the origins of the time-travelling Doctor, played by William Hartnell.
We are not of this race. We are not of this earth. We are wanderers in the fourth dimensions of space and time.
And in the first serial, viewers were introduced to the Doctor's first villain, played by Jeremy Young.
Sir, the woman went with them. I, Cal, stopped them.
A later arrival, and he wasn't in the first episode, as William Hartnell's assistant Stephen Taylor, was the young Peter Purvis.
Not that! Turn the talk back on again! There's no point. Turn it on again before he really hurts her. He can't kill her, he hasn't a hot bitch. Animal!
And William Russell played another of the Doctor's sidekicks, Ian Chesterton.
A thing that looks like a police box, standing in a junkyard. It can go anywhere in time and space?
Yes.
But it was Carol Ann Ford as the Doctor's teenage granddaughter Susan who had to explain the dimensions of time travel.
I don't know what you mean, Susan.
I made up TARDIS from the initials. Time and relative dimension in space.
Joining me round the table are 5 people who were an essential part of the early years of Doctor Who. Peter Purvis, who travelled with the Doctor for 44 episodes as his companion Stephen Taylor. Carol Ann Ford, who appeared as William Hartnell's granddaughter, Susan. Jeremy Young, the first ever Doctor Who real baddie, Evil Cal. William Russell, who played companion Ian Chesterton, and Waris Hussein, the director of that first Doctor Who episode. And let me start with you, Waris Hussein, before I ask the others, because you probably saw the script ahead of anyone else round this table, and you were very young at the time. What did you make of this task that had been handed you?
Well, I was very young, and I was very anxious to prove myself as a director because I was under contract to the BBC, and I learned that I wasn't the first director to be chosen for this. I believe there were a couple of others who had turned it down for 4 episodes, which was what we were going to do as the initial scripts. I'm afraid when I read them, I was appalled because Cambridge educated and I thought quite well up in my intelligence. How could I direct a piece that dealt with cavemen looking for fire, and how do I direct actors without being amusing or amused? And to, quite frankly, do an adventure story with jeopardy involved, would they laugh or not at these characters called Cal, her, and Ugg, or whoever? So you can imagine I approached Verity Lambert with great trepidation. I walked into her office, and that's the first time I met her, and I said, hello, what do we do with this? And she said, we do the best we can, Waris. That's what happened.
And you were to be the first Indian-born, British Indian director that the BBC had ever employed. Was that something that you were conscious of as a slight weight on your shoulders?
Very much so, because I just felt I had to prove myself. Otherwise, you know, when you go onto the studio floor and you have all these this crew looking at you saying, OK, now show us. So I had to be very well prepared.
Well, William Russell, you didn't have to prove yourself and you didn't lack experience. Sir Lancelot, and you were in Above Us the Waves, a film that, you know, has become iconic, really. Did you feel this might be a bit sort of risky?
In those days, I think we were all aiming higher and higher, and we wanted to know that what we were going to do was worthy of us. It's a lot of nonsense, of course. It was... It was what we talked about. But I met Verity, and Verity, I suppose, charmed me and delighted me. I mean, she was such a wonderful girl. And I thought, well, I'm going to work with her.
Carol, you must have been glad, because rumour has it you thought he was rather dishy.
Oh, I was terribly in love with him. I had a huge crush on him. I didn't let him know about it, of course.
He's still dishy.
But I think this is why I was disappointed with the scripts, because I was desperately hoping they'd allow Susan to fall in love with him.
Not the format at the time.
Not the format. Maybe now, but not then.
Peter Purvis, you weren't in the first episode.
No, but I saw it.
And?
Well, I was one of the many who watched the first episode, and I mean, my jaw dropped. I thought this was fantastic. I loved it, absolutely loved it, and I was a confirmed viewer of it for several months. Used to make sure that I was always in so I could watch it on a Saturday night. It was just great stuff.
So you were lucky enough to join the cast when it was an established series.
It was fully established by that time. I think they'd done 80 episodes, and Russ and Jackie were leaving.
Russ is William.
It was William, yes. Yeah. And there wasn't a lot of work around. You jumped at the opportunity to get a regular job in television. Wow, fantastic.
And Jeremy Young, you joined the team. You were the first real baddie.
Yes. I take issue a bit with the script because my doubts for the part I was playing, which was Cal, the leading villain caveman.
A bit of a grunter.
Yes, well, it seemed that there was long speeches, erudite speeches. We have lost the god fire from a Mount Olympus, or something like that. And so I said, can't we cut a lot of this down to, surely they would speak them sort of grunts and all that. And they said, yes, as long as you don't frighten the children. That's how I remember. But I was only, in the very first episode, it was only my shadow that appeared.
Yes, your shadow did appear in the first. Yes. You're quite right. Right at the end, it's illumined, and some people said the shadow was much too big.
Oh, well, it'd fit me now.
The pilot episode, famously, was actually rather poor. What are your memories of Sydney Newman conveying this to the cast after he'd seen it? William?
We watched it in this, by then, silent Rush's Theatre, the first episode, and it was a long silence. And then Sydney got up and just said, "Do it again, Waris."
I have to excuse the fact that it was poor. We were all incredibly nervous once we started launching into this situation. The reason for our nerves was that, unfortunately, the BBC in general had not much faith in this particular programme, and Lime Grove Studios were really old. They had put us there. We weren't in the gleaming television centre. We had really very little space to work in. The cameras were bigger than the Daleks themselves. The cameraman, and I was a very ambitious director, I wanted to move things around, and the poor cameraman, I think, could have sued for back trouble afterwards. The result was that over-ambition, nervousness on everyone's part, including the cast, meant a very slow rendering of what should have been a rather crisp show. And Sydney realised this, took Verity and me out to dinner, and he said, by rights I should be firing both of you, but I will actually give you another chance.
Carol Ann, did you change your performance for the second performance?
Yes. You see, my memory of Sydney's reaction was that he came up to me with a smile on his face, which was always a warning signal. He put his arm around my shoulder and said, "Oh, darling," he said, yes, very good, very good. I think he thought I was actually younger than I was. He was being quite sort of paternalistic to me. Let's just tone it down a bit. Not so weird. I didn't think I was particularly weird, but, I was an alien creature. I was trying to sort of give a little tiny intimation that I wasn't a normal person.
Even though I know Carol was somewhat upset by I'd actually directed her to be weird as well, so it wasn't her only.
It wasn't one mind.
Only because it was Unearthly Child, as you know, the title was. She did certain weird things in the pilot, which we then stopped.
And I suppose it was possible that first episode would have had to have been postponed because you recorded on the day of the assassination.
Yeah, I never actually understand how we got through it, because it was a very, very shocking thing. I was standing waiting for the lift to go up to the studio, and I was told that this had happened. And I was shaking. I thought, I'm never going to be able to do this. Quite horrendous. Because I think everybody felt they sort of were part of him and his presidency. And I think I was trying not to cry, actually. I'm sure we were all like that.
Well, of course, that's the only way to do these things. I mean, what can you do? This happened across the Atlantic. It affected all of us emotionally. But life goes on. And so we did. That's what we did.
It's a police box. Feel it. Feel it, you feel it?
It's a faint vibration.
It's alive.
For lots of people, the TARDIS, the Doctor's means of transportation, was the first real star.
We can travel anywhere and everywhere in that old box, as you call it.
Sound designer Brian Hodgson helped the TARDIS to materialise and dematerialise.
And I wanted this ripping sound, and we had this wonderful old piano frame here. And I took my mum's front door key and I scraped it down one of the bass strings. And then we used that as a basic sound, and then we turn the whole thing backwards, so you've got the echoes coming beforehand as well.
You and you, on your feet, at the double! You're in the army now!
The casting of William Hartnell as Doctor Who was a bold step. He was, by then, a very well-established actor and a television veteran. Producer Verity Lambert.
I had seen him play the Sergeant Major in a Granada television half-hour series called The Army Game, I think it was called. And he was this rather irascible, terribly difficult Sergeant Major. And then he did this wonderful role as the talent scout, the rugby talent scout in The Sporting Life, where he was rather sad and pathetic figure. He read the script and just loved it. I mean, he felt that the part had almost been written for him.
Many of the early episodes were recorded as live, hazardous for even the best actors, particularly with the often highly complex sci-fi terminology to master.
Yes, but I rather fancy that's...
Vision mixer Clive Doig.
When people like William Hartnell went off his lines, the difficulty there is everybody is looking to where he is on the script and what he's actually doing. And obviously for the actors, it was very difficult for them to have their cues and pick up where they had to come in. And that is always a matter of tension and frustration in the gallery. Sometimes one can get away with it. And the actors were very good at supporting Bill, because he was just sometimes impossible.
One thing after another. Yes, well, I didn't want to...
But when the words started to flow, Hartnell was small-screen gold.
That is the dematerializing control, and that over yonder is the horizontal hold. Up there is the scanner, those are the doors, that is a chair with a panda on it. Sheer poetry, dear boy. Now, please stop bothering me.
Hartnell's granddaughter, Jessica Carney.
Whole schools, whole classes would write to him, and he'd have, a teacher enclosing 30 letters from kids. Basically, dear Doctor Who, dear Uncle Who, dear Mr. Who, things like that, and covered in pictures of Daleks and other monsters and things like that, and saying things like, I do hope they don't get you, and hope, and I like your TARDIS, and all sorts of wonderful things like that. No, it was wonderful, and people went on writing to my grandmother even after my grandfather died.
Destroying second crop.
But there were concerns that some aspects of Doctor Who weren't quite right for the younger viewers. Cliff Mitchellmore chaired a television debate on the subject.
Let me ask Mr. Frank Turnbull, who's behind you, who's a schoolmaster, about the attitude of children towards the Doctor Who kind of violence.
I think with a normal child, they eventually grow out of this. I don't think it does them any permanent harm with a normal child.
Who's who? Who's who? Well, Doctor Who, of course.
And in 1965, the Doctor even made the hit parade with a song recorded by young Roberta Tovey.
Doctor Who flew away in the TARDIS again last night.
Within a few years, it was even deemed worthy of cultural analysis from Melvyn Bragg.
Doctor Who, among many other things, has well and truly domesticated science fiction, although when the Daleks were on, they infested children's imagination as rats did in the old fairy tales.
A large measure of its continuing success was due to the sound effects department. One of Dick Mills's greatest assets was a tub of Swarfiga.
Dick Mills, manufacturing sound effects at the BBC's radiophonic workshop.
I'd better slow this down a bit. Oh, that's much better already. It's quite frightening.
Waris, I don't know whether you were aware that Swarfiga was used for an important sound effect, even if slowed down, but the sound was really important in Doctor Who, wasn't
Yes, it certainly was. And the one sound that I felt I would be responsible for, the rest of it, of course, was done at Radiophonic, which a legendary sound with the music and everything.
Including the opening music,
Yes, it's wonderful. One of the episodes in The Villain in Ours, played by Jeremy, is finally put to death by our hero, who picks up a huge boulder and brings it down on his head and crushes his skull. Well, this is off camera, of course, but what we saw was this big boulder being raised up in vision and smashed out of air vision. And I had a man standing by with a hammer and a huge pumpkin, and he was going to smash the pumpkin off camera just as the boulder hit off camera. And Verity said to me, while we were in the control room, in a rather calm way, she says, "You're not going to use that sound, are you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because it's for children, Waris, and we do not want crushed skulls off camera." So I then stood up and said, "Fine, I'm going to leave. If I can't do this, I'm leaving." And I walked to the exit, and she said, "If you open that door and go out, you'll never come back in again." So I'm afraid I skulked back and sat down in the director's chair, and we did not use the sound effect of the crushed skull.
I remember you telling me to actually keep the screams, because, obviously an actor suddenly marvellous to get screams or all that sort of thing, but to tone them down.
Tone them down because of children.
Because of the children, yes, exactly.
What was your costume then, Jeremy?
Oh, well, a caveman costume. I mean, furs. But I remember waiting in the studio for the lights to warm up. It was at Lime Grove, and they'd shipped in all this sand and polystyrene rocks, but real sand.
This was for 100,000 BC.
This is for, yes, indeed, yeah. And then suddenly the sand started to get alive, and they were actually sand fleas. They started to bite, as you see, and get amongst all the fur. And then there was a young woman there, and she was all daubed and, with all the filth and dirt that the makeup people put on her. But she was actually getting rather more and more upset, you see. And in the end, she said, "Oh, for God's sake, this is not what I'm used to." And she gets up and stalks out of the studio, you see. And apparently what happened was she was actually a model. And her agent had sort of told her, "Get down to Lime Studios, I think they're modelling furs." And so that was why she was there.
I mean, she thought she was modelling furs and she ended up as a cave woman.
And the other thing about we had this big fight at the end between myself and Derek Newark, who was the main adversary to my villain. So we, rough tumbled. I said, "Let's make it an animal fight." But,
wonderful fight.
Thanks.
Wonderful fight.
Couldn't do it now. But the junior points of view used to actually request that they stop the action during the fight and to see what the best-dressed cavemen were wearing for modesty, you see. Mine were a pair of old M&S knickers, I think.
Whereas some of the critics weren't entirely sure what to make of it, and the BBC has its big audience research unit, as you know very well, and at the time a retired naval officer who was on the panel said tonight's new serial, and that was of course the very first episode, seemed to be a cross between H.G. Wells's The Time Machine and a space-age old curiosity shop with a touch of Max Sennett comedy. Did he have a point, do you think?
There was adventure, there was tension, and there was comedy. So what more do you want out of a show which at that time we did not realise would echo through the years?
Because the American science fiction series took themselves a great deal more seriously.
Yes, indeed. And that's one of the reasons why I'm saying we, are still here. The others had their terminations. They came to an end because you can't go on pursuing a story in outer space and being very serious about it all the time.
We heard earlier recordings of William Hartnell, the first Doctor Who, getting a little bit into trouble, maybe forgetting the odd line. But he was a very powerful Doctor Who. Peter Purves, you got to know him rather well.
I did. He took me under his wing rather, and he was very generous to me. But he was losing the facility to remember the words all the way through. Listening to the very first recording there, he was right on the script. He was on the button with that, as he would have been. By the time I joined the show, he really was having difficulty with words. And it was that, because he was quite a perfectionist as an actor, he wanted to get it right.
Oh, he was.
And when he got it wrong, he got cross. Yeah. And when it almost defined the character. The character grew out of himself being annoyed with himself and everything else. I do a passable impression of him. And I'm not going to do it now, but...
go on.
No, my dear. I mean, the whole point of this entire programme is that we look at what the show was about. And I changed, because now I can't remember the bloody lines. He was determined to get it right. When he got it wrong, he was angry with himself, and it made him play it in a certain way. I found it fascinating. It grew and grew and grew, and by the time he left the show, it had almost become a parody of itself, I suppose. I loved him. For me, he's always the Doctor. There'll never be another. I do think there have been better actors playing Doctor Who, but none as good as Bill.
In fact, were most of the episodes recorded as live? In other words, that there wasn't much room for editing?
There was only enough in the budget for about 3 edits. Now, that's absurd, but it meant that if something went wrong, you couldn't do it again. If Billy made a mistake, which he did often, bless his heart. My favourite one in The Mythmakers, when we're in Troy and they're worshipping him as a god, and he stands up and he says, "No, I'm not a dog, a god." And that's how it went out. That's actually how it went out.
Carol Ann, what were your own memories of William Hartnell? You were maybe a little bit awe of him, were you?
Actually adored him.
Because he was like William, a well-established movie actor.
Yes, he was. But he's funny. I mean, whether it's because he was just so immersed in his character, he had to treat me that way. He was very grand paternalistic towards me. He really did treat me as if I was his granddaughter. I mean, to the extent that he would sometimes criticise me, I must say, and I would flare up at him sometimes and say, "How dare you treat me like that? You're not my grandfather, you silly man."
What sort of thing? Did he give you tips?
Oh, he did. Oh, yeah. Yes, about the way I dressed. And especially, I mean, look, for goodness sake, this was the 60s when everything was happening, especially in the fashion world. You've got your Mary Kwan, Bieber's around the corner, and I used to take my check and I used to spend it. I used to come in and to the rehearsals, and I used to wear what I'd spent it on, and he'd come up to me and say, "Not another outfit, you silly girl, you know you won't be getting a regular paycheck every single day of your life as an actress. Now, you should be saving it."
He was a bit worried when you had a drink after the show, wasn't he?
He was indeed.
Because he thought you were 15.
We used to decamp off to the club, and I loved champagne, and I still do. I used to toddle off to the bar and order myself a champagne or a champagne cocktail, and I would sit down. We'd sit down at the same table usually, and he'd say, "What have you got there, child?" I said, "Belle, first of all, I'm not a child. Secondly, I've got champagne and I'm going to drink it. Thank you very much." "I don't think you should." He'd actually physically take it away from me.
It was very funny with me because he always, he tested me very early on to see whether I knew what I was doing. I was very young. I mean, being 24, and this is a veteran actor being directed by me. What is this boy doing? What's this boy doing? And Verity, what's this girl doing? Yeah. I mean, it was boy and girl. And so he had to be cajoled. And the marvellous arc of our relationship throughout this was that not only did he stop testing me, but he ended up trusting me. And I think that was a huge progress in our relationship. By the time I left that show, it was quite emotional.
That is where we come from. It is called Mondas. Mondas, but isn't that one of the
The enemies of the Doctor came in all shapes and sizes. In the early years, there were slightly camp, foil-clad robots, the Cybermen.
We are called Cybermen. Cybermen? Yes, Cybermen.
And the Animus was a giant crossbred octopus come spider.
We come in peace.
Peace? Is that why you attack? Where is your main force?
We are alone. We have strayed from our astral plane.
When will your invasion fleet arrive? What is its weaponry?
Doctor Who's creator, Sydney Newman, laid down the law when it came to enemy life forms.
There'd be no bug-eyed monsters. Bug-eyed monsters is the cheapest form of science fiction. And so I made it very clear I don't want any monsters. I don't want slimy creatures and that sort of schlock stuff. And then suddenly I'm at home on Saturday afternoon and watching the Doctor Who, and they're the Daleks.
The Daleks were to become Doctor Who's nemesis. They were conceived by the writer Terry Nation, designer Ray Cusick.
When I asked Bill Roberts, the special effects chap who was going to make them, when I invited him to lunch, and I picked up the pepper pot and moved it around the table, and said it's going to move like that. No visible means, no wheels or anything.
The Daleks' debut was in December 1963. Sound designer Brian Hodgson and the actor Peter Hawkins provided the metallic rasp of the Daleks.
We had to make sure that the delivery was right. It had to be very sort of tight and like that. And of course, Peter, being a brilliant actor he is, just picked that up immediately, made it very specially his own.
Over 500 years ago, there were two races on this planet. We, the Daleks, and the Thals.
The actors inside the Daleks sometimes had a rather hazardous job.
I can remember on one occasion, Kevin, one of the other operators, and myself were hurtling down a corridor, and we had smoke inside the Dalek with a smoke machine, and then we were coming from each end of the corridor, crashed into each other. Pyrotechnic fireworks went off. Kevin melted his nylon shirt and his back. I was dragged out by a fireman, and the director called me and said, "Oh, we will have to do it again, lads."
Well, that was a pretty good scream from you, Carol Ann. You had to do quite a lot of screaming in the series, didn't you?
I did. I had to do a hell of a lot of screaming. I don't know what Waris would say, but I have an idea that possibly that was in mind when they chose me to do it, because the thing that I was doing at the time they first saw me was a thing called Man on a Bicycle, which was part of the Suspense series. And I had to do a huge amount of screaming in that. So I imagine they thought, oh, she's a good screamer, she'll do.
Did you feel that your part wasn't that subtle then?
You had subtle. I look at the present wonderful Doctor Who, and I look at them, especially Matt Smith, when he looks at these disgustingly ugly creatures and says, oh, you're beautiful, aren't you? I mean, the thing is, if they've been travelling around for God knows how many years, seeing one planet after another and meeting one alien creature after another, I don't think they would have been screaming. Well, she wouldn't have been screaming at everything.
Waris Hussein.
The fact is that, unfortunately, heroines do scream, and they go back all the way to King Kong and onwards. It is a part of the ritual, and unfortunately, Carol had to bear that burden. But most ladies in Jeopardy, until now, of course, now they don't do that. They do karate kicks.
Yes.
But in the old days, screaming was a part of the suspense point, so that the hero, or in our case, the Doctor, would come and rescue his granddaughter.
What was your first impression of the Daleks as characters, Waris?
Well, I had a very nice conversation with Raymond Cusick. And at the time, he had no budget. And he had to create these characters that Terry Nation had said would be sliding along. But how do you do it?
Is it true he got paid 50 quid?
That was as a thank you afterwards. Because being on a salary, as we all were, we were contract people, we were members of staff, we didn't get anything from this financially. So he created what he could out of what he then described as an upturned egg cup and a lavatory plunger and an egg cup. And that's what I've done. So
plumber's friend.
Out of that comes this iconic image.
It was a bloke sitting in the bottom half of a Dalek on wheels, walking it around the place, and Peter Hawkins standing at the side doing the voice, which alarmingly he did almost without the distort that gets put on the overall thing. He made them sound like they should.
Yeah, I remember the exciting thing for having a fight with a Dalek as Ian, having a fight and a struggle and avoiding getting electrocuted and picking up his top and pulling it off and looking down and then plunging my arm in to the unknown and bringing out a sort of dishcloth which was all dripping.
You had to be careful, didn't you? Because, a lot of children watched from behind the sofa anyway, including yours, William.
My three children did, yes. They watched always from behind the sofa.
Did people criticise it because it was over-explicit and perhaps over-violent? I have a theory that black and white is always more scary than colour anyway.
I agree with you. I think it is more atmospheric, yes. I mean, there are always people who are going to criticise and other people love it. And my daughter Miranda was 3 at the time, and she was also hiding behind the sofa, terrified. And I thought, well, I can't, especially when the Daleks were on, I thought, I can't allow this. She's going to have nightmares. I thought, what can I do about it? I thought, I know, I'll take her to the studio and she can go and sit in a Dalek and she'll see they're not scary at all because you can actually sit inside them and play with them. So I did this and she enjoyed it very much. And the next time she watched, she hid behind the sofa again. It made no difference at all.
William Hartnell was absolutely crucial, of course, as the first Doctor. Yeah. He was a fine actor, but in the end, he had to go because, he had to give way to somebody else.
He wasn't well. He wasn't well, and he couldn't remember his lines. Yes. It was a problem. And I think the show could have stopped then. And to come up with the regeneration idea was really wonderful in many ways. It was interesting, though, that his first regeneration from Bill to Patrick Troughton wasn't that much of a shift.
No.
It wasn't a huge shift.
They were being careful.
They were being very careful, and it worked. And having worked, then suddenly they could go wherever they liked. Bill had created something which was going to be very hard to follow, and I think it's pursued all the way through. I think Matt Smith is about... He's the kind of character who would grow into being Bill Hartnell, quirky enough to be that.
In 1966, William Hartnell regenerated into Patrick Troughton.
Thank heavens you made it. The others here too?
No, they're still in the rocket. How many of the Ice Warriors are there?
These creatures, you mean?
Yes.
Well, there aren't many, but they're deadly.
Well, there's only one thing for it. We shall have to destroy Tiamat.
What?
11 actors have played the Doctor on British television since 1963. Tom Baker, who spent 7 years in the role, is the longest-serving of them all.
One of the problems about playing the Doctor, which makes it interesting for the actor who plays it, and everybody's been successful at it, therefore it would seem to be actor-proof, is that it's not an acting part in the sense that the character is very, very severely limited.
The BBC and the audience did lose faith in Doctor Who, though. After struggling to hold its ratings, it was shelved for the 1990s. There were no new Doctor Who episodes on British television for 16 years. And then, in 2005, it came back with a vengeance.
I'm the Doctor, by the way. What's your name?
Rose.
Nice to meet you, Rose. Run for your life.
Russell T Davies was the writer and executive producer behind the relaunch.
When it was launched in Cardiff, all the TV reviewers were up there.
It was balmy. It was like a film premiere. I've never seen the like. I mean, we've yet to... The great British public will decide in the end, never mind all your critics.
Because a lot has changed in British culture.
Some feared the worst. Matthew Sweet on The Culture Show.
This isn't me whining about big boys coming and taking Doctor Who away from me. Let them all come. Doctor Who is the most flexible, indestructible TV format ever devised.
Gone are disused quarry pits. Now Doctor Who has a high-tech home near Cardiff, and Matt Smith is the current Doctor.
I spend 9 months a year in Cardiff, so for 9 months a year it is home.
For Russell T Davies, the basic appeal is still the same as it was half a century ago.
A kid is still scared of the dark, and he's still scared of that wardrobe door in the dark that might open. I think that goes beyond. I think kids are scared of that before they've seen a film.
But for writer and Doctor Who fanatic Mark Gatiss, it was the very British settings of some of the early Doctor Who's that made the best impact.
It is immediately an exciting idea, the notion of those sort of faceless factories and gasometers that we all grew up around, and policemen whose faces came off.
Excuse me, officer, could I see your warrant card?
It's just a brilliant way of sort of dealing with your neurosis.
Looking back on those early episodes, particularly the first one that we've been discussing today, do you feel affection, nostalgia, ooh, it could have been better, or a lot of water's passed under the bridge? What do you feel, Waris?
All of the above.
All of the above. I personally feel nostalgia, partly. It's been reawakened in me because obviously we've moved away and on in our lives. But looking back on what we did, I think there is an element there that perhaps, and I might be sounding heretical in this, there has been a sea change in that particular person that we're talking about, which is Doctor Who. There's an element now, I know we're living in a different era, of sexuality that has crept in. The intriguing thing about the original person was that you never quite knew about him, and there was a mystery and an unavailability about him. Now, we've just had a recent rebirth, and another girl has just joined as a companion. She actually snogged him in the first episode of her presence. When you have pairings and you have a man and a woman, the constant is that, are they going to actually get together in the end? Well, that's one story, but the Doctor Who is continuing. Why bring in this element when in fact you needn't have it there? Being critical, because I think it's a loss. The person who's unavailable currently and is now hugely popular is Sherlock. He's unavailable. And I always felt that that's what Doctor Who should be about. There's been a sort of transition now.
What do you feel, Peter Pavey?
No, I agree totally with that. The other thing that I think that the show has lost, it may have gained in other areas. It certainly gained technically, and it certainly gained in the finance available to make it, was that the original series were so simple. They were very straightforward, nice linear stories that one could follow. The technical ability means that they can do wonderful things now, which I'm not going to knock in any way, but I don't like it as much.
What do you think about the transformation of not only Doctor Who, but his companions?
I must say I do envy the companions because they have such wonderfully exciting things to do and such marvellously athletic things to do. I was actually told that I was going to be rather like an Avengers character. I was going to have the physicality of that. And at that time, I could have done it because I was a trained dancer and I was an acrobat. And I could have done all sorts of wonderful karate chops at the Daleks. That would have been great fun. And also that my wardrobe was going to be extraordinary. We poured through lots of magazines and none of that happened. It all went out of the window. I just became ordinary.
Do you think that part of the success of Doctor Who, and it contrasted very much with the American sci-fi series that we were hearing earlier, was that it was utterly British? Waris, perhaps you're a good person to ask about this.
I actually likened it to 1001 Nights. You're going to tell a story which is endless, and you will continue as long as you can be imaginative enough and let the characters transform themselves and come back into the original and go on. But that's partly British and partly storytelling in any language or any culture. It's not. Sometimes it's British because Doctor Who is very British. Funnily enough, that was because it was William Hartnell who was the ultimate true Brit.
Of course, there's going to be a big BBC drama based on Doctor Who, the creation of Mark Gatiss. What do you feel about that, Waris?
I'm intrigued. I'd love to see what the results are.
Peter Purvis?
Yes, I gather that I am in it, but as a non-speaking part. They'll never find anyone as handsome and as good-looking as me to play it.
Caroline?
I'm totally fascinated to see it, and I'm also in it being portrayed by a young girl who I haven't met yet. And I wish her good luck, because I didn't know what I was on about, so how she's going to do it, I really no idea.
William?
One is curious.
Jeremy?
I haven't been chosen to be in it, so I don't care. I don't care.
So far as you know.
Oh, don't worry. No. I wish it well. Good luck.
How much did Doctor Who influence your future career? Waris?
Oh, my goodness. It influenced everything that's happened since. I'm so grateful for the show, having started off in such an apprehensive way. I'm also grateful to Verity Lambert. I mean, I could not have done without her encouragement.
Peter Purvis?
I did 44 episodes in a year, and when I left it, I struggled for work. Nothing sort of bounced off. There was no spin-off from it. Blue Peter came 18 months later.
Jeremy Young, looking back, what do you feel now?
I feel lucky that one's still here, because it's 50 years.
Oh,
I mean, that's... I know, I'm sorry. And also, remembering people and listening to Verity, for instance, voices from the past. That's really, I think, oh, crikey, it's what a shame that they're not here to actually celebrate this.
William Russell?
I was more respectful for it. I was actually rather opposed to it in a strange sort of way.
Well, you thought telly wasn't quite as good as being in the movies.
That's right. I used to talk with Bob Shaw about this all the time. Do you think we ought to do it? You know what'll happen, boy? You'll be riding down Fifth Avenue on a horse. Nonsense, Bob. And all that happened. It was great fun. That's high up in my requirements of life.
William Russell, Peter Purvis, Carol-Anne Ford, Jeremy Young and Waris Hussein. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us here.